Good afternoon, and welcome to the Minneapolis Institute of Arts. My name is Nicole Sukup, and I am the Assistant Curator of Contemporary Art and the Coordinator for the Minnesota Arts Exhibition Program. I am not Jennifer Comal-Veras. My apologies to disappoint, but unfortunately Jennifer is unable to join us this afternoon. We'll have a few more people kind of coming in and joining us. Please come on in. The MAEP talks are pretty informal. I think we're okay with that. Informality is never a bad thing. So with that, I'm going to introduce myself, introduce the program, introduce our guest of honor for today's conversation. And then we'll be in conversation for about 50 minutes. We will not be taking questions from the audience today, but instead I encourage everybody here to meet Tia and if you have questions for me or Tia, to meet us out by the fountain, just kind of through the threshold of the auditorium. It gets to be really tight. This auditorium was built in the 1930s, and space wasn't a big thing, or wasn't as necessary a thing then as it was or is in a post-COVID world. So I just encourage you all to bring our conversations and our questions and our curiosity either out to the fountain or to the MAEP Gallery, which is just down the hall. And you can take another look at Tia's beautiful and poignant exhibition, Revealing Threads. Yeah, go ahead. That deserves a round of applause. As I stated, my name is Nicole Sukup, and I will be in conversation. I'm the Assistant Curator of Contemporary Art, and I oversee the Minnesota Artist Exhibition Program, soon to be entering its 50th year. Yeah, you can clap for that. The MAEP is a unique program in which a jury of peers, elected artists, select one proposal to receive $13,500 in an exhibition here at MIA. Artists have been participating in the program, whether they're a panelist or an artist or both, as Tia is in our case here. The program is unique across the country, and I don't have to explain Minnesota's uniqueness to anyone in this crowd. However, it would not be possible without the support of our donors, our members, and in particular, I want to thank the generous support from RBC and other corporations who support many of our programs here at MIA. So without further ado, let me introduce our guest of honor, maybe much to her chagrin. Tia Keobounpheng is a designer, maker, and artist. She received the 2017 and 2020 Minnesota State Arts Board grants. In 2018, she received the McKnight Foundation Next Step. And in 2022, she received the Minnesota State Arts Board grant for individual artists. So with that, Tia, before we go any further, I just want to quickly briefly mention that her show is up through October 29th. Again, up through October 29th here at the Minneapolis Institute of Art. I don't know if you caught that. It's up for about another month. So if your friends haven't seen it yet, remind them it's only another month. So with that, I'm going to hand the clicker over. Tia, why don't you introduce your practice to us and kind of talk about how we got to this moment?
Before I do that, I'm just going to say a quick thank you to all of you for being here. Thank you to Nicole. Thank you to the program. Thank you to Mia. When I talk about a practice, it is a living, breathing thing. And so as a human being, I'm going to speak to you today, where I am today, given what I know today, and I reserve the right to be wrong about what I think I know. And I think that that's a really important aspect especially when you're dealing with ancestral work, and the type of work that I am doing personally that's reflected in my art is really like kind of seeking in the dark in a way. Seeking in the dark. there's one piece in the exhibition that reveals the backside, and I think it's very symbolic of what it is to try to resolve personal issues and to search for clues about the people you come from. So I grew up with an architect father. I learned to see the world through his lens from a very young age. Design has always been a part of my life. For many years, I've used the phrase that I'm exploring at the intersection of design, art, and craft. And so this diagram is really mine. Like, I'm not making broad universal statements about what design or what craft or what art is. This is what it is to me. And I have explored in different parts, so the intersection. So I really began in the design realm, first getting my degree in architecture, which is an undergraduate degree. So I am not an architect. I would have to go back to school to become an actual architect, but I studied architecture and design and architectural design. I have been making laser cut jewelry for over 15 years. That really operates within that realm of design for me in terms of the process. I also have done graphic design type things. My brother is a real graphic designer. I am just someone who uses graphic design as a tool, and fabric design, illustration type stuff. In 2014, I experienced a burnout, and I now actually consider it a breakdown of my ability to continue to squeeze myself into the boxes and the expectations that I felt I needed to. And in 2016, as part of my ongoing attempts to reframe how I could exist in the world if I wasn't performing for others' expectations, I returned to working with my hands. First through weaving, returning to weaving. I had a very emotional attachment, and I also studied weaving with someone that I now know was a valuable and beloved member of the Sami American community in Duluth. I didn't know that at the time, but I learned everything I know about weaving from Mel Olson. It was also a time when I started learning how to work in metal. And so those two activities returned me to working with my hands, which essentially returned me to working with my body instead of my brain, instead of my mind. Laser cut jewelry, I would design it in AutoCAD and cut out the parts. But with metal, I was fabricating pieces from flat sheets, making them into three-dimensional forms, etc. And then from there, I have moved back into the art realm. And I say back into it because I think I've always been an artist. I was very artistic as a kid. I've always been drawn to art. But there was also a period, like many people experience, where I was not confident or able to really think of myself as an artist. I didn't know how to be the artist that I am now, and I certainly didn't know how to be the artist that I wanted to be back then. And so returning to my hands first meant that I was allowed, and I'd say it that way because it really was this needing to grant myself permission to explore. First, I was allowed to make metal jewelry. And from that, I earned a state arts board grant to get metalworking equipment. And something about getting an artist grant then opened my mind to thinking of myself as, well, maybe I am an artist, or maybe I could be the artist that the 20-year-old me really dreamed of being. And so at the end of this exploratory project, working in metal and exploring different types of metal earrings and necklaces, I started to create small sculptures and then a little bit bigger sculptures. And that was really the avenue to getting into artistic expression. This coincided with me turning 40, and any women who are 40 or older know that that is a really powerful time, I think, for it was a powerful time for me. I'll just say that. It was a very powerful time for me. And I started to really feel like I needed to examine some of these aspects that were very emotional and raw for me. So this piece is called Full Circle. And so, my exhibition is all about circles. So the circle, I think this was the first real time it came. But full circle, if you look it up in the dictionary, it says something to the effect of coming back to the original position or the opposite of the original position. And so for me, at the age of 40, to come back to this place where I could entertain the idea of being the artist I had wanted to be at 20, and having the tools and the skills and the confidence to move forward in that direction, was the opposite of the position that I was in at 20. So the circle came to me. I have a series of sculptures called Bloodline, and they are inspired by a conversation I had with Christina Woods, who introduced me to, in her life as an Anishinaabe woman, to the concept of blood memory, and this idea that our bodies hold things that we don't always know, or that we can't always define or understand. And so Bloodline is a series that takes that a bit. This is where I was starting to explore epigenetics and the idea that maybe I'm holding some sort of experience or some sort of residue from someone in my lineage that could be contributing to my own personal issues that led me to burnout years before. And so, generations and epigenetics and inherited memory entered my work through this series. And then it extended to Unweaving, where it became about a specific story about my mother's mother, who I did not know. She died 9 months before I was born. And I researched historically about an experience that she had when she was young with her family that was traumatic for her, that she could not talk about. And so through this project of Unweaving, I essentially spoke about it for her and tried to do what she couldn't do to resolve that for her, and also for me, and hopefully maybe a little bit for my mother and others who descend from her. And then this project also is where the idea of unweaving really came into my practice. And I began to think about weaving. For people who don't know, when you weave, in a basic weave, you have the warp that's usually wound on the loom. And so it feels almost like it's an endless thing. You wind it and you keep weaving it. And so I would think of the warp as the threads of time and lineage, and the weft, which goes over and under and around the structure of the warp. I began to think of that as my behaviors, learned behaviors that were defined by the warp and the structure. And so conceptually, this idea of removing my behaviors in order to see the lineage entered my practice. At this time, I was also, this is from, it's noted as being from 2021, but this body of work started in 2018, and it's called Forced Force, and it's really exploring the idea of being forced into a mold that isn't made for you, that doesn't fit you correctly. And it can vary in extremes from actual physical force to psychological to just emotional, or the societal pressures that we feel. And so each component of this system starts as a flat sheet of metal and is then forced into a mold that it doesn't fit into. And this is from an exhibition at the Duluth Art Institute in 2021. And you can see on the right the way that those components come together to create a pattern. They were each individually forced together, they become a force, but they also reflect patterns. And so I was thinking about patterns as it relates to assimilation and also to white oblivion. So this was where I began to examine my own whiteness and the way that I have learned to be in the world because of social structures and patterns. And at that time, I was conceptualizing, I was looking through old images and I had forgotten about this actually. This does not exist. This was just a concept that I was exploring, but already here you start to see these two different patterns coming together in a proposed installation of this body of work. And so this idea of the patterns coexisting, I believe, started here. And so all of that was in my head, all of that was in my body, all of that was in my world and in my practice when I attended fourth grade geometry with my then fourth grader during the pandemic. And it was online, it was the 8th month of distance learning, and I had to sit through the class with him. And his teacher, Maddie B., started the lesson with the statement that geo means earth, so geometry is just measuring the earth. And because of all of the other things that were in my mind at that time, his statement felt revolutionary to me. And so you can see on the left, that was the exercise that we needed to complete for the class. And then you can see what I started to do after Veli was done. He finished his homework and then I just kept going. And so the only other time that I had experienced that real passion and like kind of obsessiveness was when I started my daily practice in 2017. And so I had created one piece a day for 2.5 years straight. And so there's a repetition that I know works for me when I'm trying to figure something out or find my footing in an idea. And so I started a 100-day project that essentially took that geometry lesson and turned it into something that I could explore in. And so I would start with pencil and watercolor, and I would pull one pattern out in the color, and then I would stitch a second pattern with thread. And it was an amazing exercise where I explored different stitching approaches. And anybody who has done a 100-day project knows that, there's a rhythm within those 100 days where in the beginning you're very enthusiastic, and in the middle you kind of are relieved that you get to day 50. And then after that, it's like, okay, now the real work comes, and that's where the lessons are. And so I found my way to this system of parallel threads, which to me spoke of the warp that I had talked about, and that didn't have the weft. And so here you can see all of those 100 pieces in an exhibition that they were installed together. And it was during this project that I was also doing genealogy, and I discovered a piece of information about my grandfather's grandmother that didn't fit with the story that I had grown up with. And so that was where my ancestral exploration began, trying to find information about my great-great-grandmother Wilhelmina, and trying to determine if the story that my grandfather told about her indicated that she really was Sami and not Finnish or Norwegian, because she was born in Norway. So because I was in this project and because I was practicing, that all of those questions became thread and tied into my work. And the back sides became just as important as the front sides, in part because of what I mentioned earlier about this process of seeking answers in places that don't readily give them to you. But also, this was in 2021, after a pandemic, after the murder of George Floyd. This was during the trial. And I also felt a really powerful relationship between the front and the back in terms of intent and impact. So this is an exhibition called Intend that was at the Suvat Gallery this year while I was preparing for this exhibition, where I took that project, that exploratory project, and transferred it to Black pressed paperboard with colored pencil and metallic thread. And then I forced everybody to see the backside first. And I made them look in the mirror to see what they wanted to see. And so that I feel grateful that I had that show at that time, because it touched on this intent impact component that I feel very much while I'm doing my practice. But these pieces on paper really led to working on wood, which is what you see in the gallery now. This is an exhibition in 2022 at the Department of Art History Gallery at the University of St. Thomas in St. Paul. And this was the first show where I did, I made this bold move to not show my sculpture and to just let these pieces stand on their own. And I feel like it was a really pivotal moment for me to see the work. Something happens to the work that you make in your studio when it goes into a gallery. And I can't tell you exactly what that is, but it changes the way that you see it. And I really feel like I learn my biggest lessons when I see it this way. My work teaches me, I think. And so, this is how I got to this place where I'm working with pencil and colored pencil and embroidery thread on wood panel. This is threads number 4 that I completed in 2022, and it was the first piece that incorporated 3 different, what I call channels of thread. That means that within the threads, there are 3 different patterns that are embedded into each other. And I think it's extremely powerful. It's powerful for me. So anyway, that's how we got to where we are.
So having known you and having, I think at the St. Thomas show was one of the, not the first time, but it was one of the first times that we did an in situ's, not a studio visit, but a site visit. And you were applying, I think you had applied a few times to the MAP by that point, and the MAP only accepts less than 1% of all artists who apply. Just to give you a notion of how competitive it truly is. And but I was always impressed because you don't call what other people would refer to as sketches, you refer to as analog. You have a very different approach to the work. And I'm wondering if you could give us a little insight just right before we jump into this exhibition about where the process starts. I mean, you seem to map it out in AutoCAD or an AutoCAD type program and go from there. Can you maybe talk about the pragmatic side of this, the logistics?
I mean, I'm going to maybe try to do it through that next perfect diagram.
Didn't tee you up at all there.
No, not at all. Good job. So, I mean, method I can talk about the method, obviously. Yes, I do. I start in AutoCAD just to test my math, which means that if I'm working on a certain size panel, I can add that, I can draw that panel. AutoCAD is a drafting program that architects use, and it allows you to draw to scale, which means that like I can add measurements to everything, and I can make sure that what I'm thinking about and drawing is actually going to work out in the physical world. So I test my math that way, and then everything is mapped out using pencil and rulers and compasses. From there, I now start where especially on the big ones, I also create this just web of parallel vertical lines so that I can map out the drill holes. From there, I drill all of the holes, and then I color with colored pencil, and then I start threading.
And so I think what I'm trying to get at here is we talk about multi-channels. And when you start to unpack that in terms of a digital experience, those of us who used to use InDesign like me or Photoshop, you might know it as layers, channels, layers. I think you're talking, or masks, I think, depending on the program you use. But really, it's all labor.
Yeah, it's all labor. Intentionally so. So going back to you mentioned measured analog, I can just tell you that all of my daily projects, like my 100-day projects, had a title that was really trying to frame the concept behind it. So measured analog for me, I was thinking about, I think I had looked it up, analog is something like there's just this constant flow of energy, and to measure it was like being able to start to define the energy.
Yeah. So I think what I'm getting at here is it's not only the geometry or the concept or the color, the formal qualities of this, it's a physical.
Very physical. And coming from design and coming from a business-minded place where I would create products for people to buy, jewelry as products or whatever, this is a very different process, and it's intentionally so. There are many ways that I could choose to use technology or to use my design skills or knowledge to automize or to make this an easier process. But for me, I understand that, I have a hypothesis that, women have been processing their lot in life through handwork for millennia. It's the way that we process. And now there's neuroscientists who can tell us what happens in our brain when we work with our hands. But so for me, it is a very physical process. That's why body is on there. Method is like the organization of the ways. Body is literally my body. Context for me is the ancestry and the genealogy, and like seeing myself within this larger web of the people who made me possible. Concept is the unweaving and the ideas, the conceptual ideas that are woven in there. Geometry is a different world view. It's like a different way of seeing the world. And then color is a really beautiful way to express this negotiation and the breaking down of a binary, and really seeing a binary as just the extremes of a spectrum. So black and white are just the extremes of a full spectrum of color.
So these are all really beautiful concepts, and they're beautifully color coded. But that's the art historical term. But you have this central circle where they all meet. Is that you, or is that your practice?
Oh, I was thinking of that as the work, but I guess the work is my practice, and the practice is me.
So let's talk about you for a little bit here. And many of Tia's family are here tonight or today. Tia, when Tia and I were talking about how to have this conversation today, I said to Tia, this is a very unique way to describe family heritage. It is not a typical family chart. And Tia said, I should get it branded.
I think I said
could go to the
trademarked.
patent office. And I said, okay, Tia. So Tia, talk about this. What are we looking at?
Okay, so I am at the center. I am the black dot at the center. It actually says Tia in there. The right side of the white circle is my mother Gladys. The left side is my dad David. And so every ring is a different generation. And I specifically color coded this chart to coincide with threads number 9, because I talk about these numbers of circles that kind of surround the central orange circle, which I was thinking about as me, to illustrate what that really looks like, you know, how many people that really is. And I know that I believe anyway, I believe from experience that we all inherit different portions and different proportions of people or things from our past. I mean, I'm one of 5 kids, and we're all different. And I think we've all inherited different aspects of the people in our lives that made us. So this doesn't reflect that, but it does reflect just how many people have to exist in order for us to exist. And this is true for every single person. Biologically true.
No, it's a fact. That is true. But I think there's another fact that came up in our conversation about epigenetics. And for those who don't know what epigenetics are, it's a term we've used a couple of times today. And epigenetics is the story or the study of genetics, but it's the impact of a previous generation onto the physical body. And so one way to think of this that's maybe a little bit more poetic, but just as factual. And Tia, this came up in our conversation. And so speaking of women and women's work and women's labor, quite literally, when you're pregnant with the eggs that will produce your grandchildren. If you're pregnant with a girl, so that fetus already produces those eggs. So the trauma that happens to your body, whether that's stress, emotional trauma, whether that's starvation in an extreme example, or surviving, cancer in a previous life, or just the genetics that pass on, gray hair, or hair at all, that all gets passed on quite literally from grandmother to child to grandchild in that act of giving birth, in that act of childhood development. And
I mean, for me, that particular relationship was extremely powerful when I was doing the Unweaving project, because that was my mother's mother. She died 9 months before I was born, and I had never known her. We were alive at the same time. And then suddenly learning about epigenetics and that I was the egg inside my mother's body as a fetus inside my grandmother gave me a physical connection to her. And, there's also really powerful studies that they can explain how trauma passes through mice that are traumatized, and grandchildren responding to the trigger of the trauma, not the trauma itself. I mean, there's science that's telling us the things that are often understood in other cultures in the world just inherently. But yeah, oh, you changed it.
I did change it. Not to end on that note, but I think this is a great segue then to talk about what inspired your trip. So you received the MAP about a year ago from this time, like 14 months passed. And you had told me you were about to go on a trip, and it was really critical. And even before you applied, you were debating, do I apply before? Do I apply after? And I said, well, you never know. It's a panel. And then you got it. Can you tell us a little bit about this trip and its relevance and where you went?
Sure. I mean, I applied 8 times.
Yeah,
in a row.
I remember.
I was selected on the 8th time. That's 2 and almost a half years that one applies for these things. And it's fine. I think it's important to apply for things. I mean, my proposal was different every time. But anyway, the last 2 times it was about this work. And I think the trip was a critical component in it. So the trip was planned Mostly because I was just so compelled to go to the place where Wilhelmina, my great-great-grandmother, was born. And so I planned the trip. You can see, I mean, I was an exchange student in Finland when I was 18. So I lived in the town furthest south called Oulu. That's the green dot there. And my family knows relatives there. On my dad's side of the family, we have Finnish relatives. So I was staying with people that I knew. I was in some places that I had already been before, but I rented a car, and basically there's a town called Tortola with a green dot. That is where relatives lived. But once I departed that place, I was on uncharted territory for me. And so I went straight north up to Norway to Kautokeino. And then from there, I went to Alta, and then west along the northern coast to a village called Shakkan, which is where Wilhelmina was born. And I spent several nights there. And then from there, I drove west to Kilpisjärvi and back south down into Sweden. And I was just wanting to go and feel what it felt like to be in those places, because at that point in time, I didn't have any solid leads or connections. Of course, what I have found through this process is that as I learned and examined and shifted my way of knowing and seeing and understanding, I began to see clues where I might not have seen them before. And so I was, I think, in Shakkan, Norway, when I got a message from a cousin that I had found online through a blog post. Julie she started feeding me some information while I was on the trip. So I was essentially going to dots on a map. And when I made it down to Vettasjärvi, which is the ancestral village where Wilhelmina's father and grandfather and great-grandfather settled, I took some pictures and I took some drone footage that you see in the film. And then I went to the hotel, and Julie sent me a picture of this house. She's like, did you look for this house when you're there? And I had already left. And I looked through my photos, and I had taken the exact photo of that house.
I think some folks call that kismet. Fate.
There are other ways to describe it too.
There are many ways. But let's jump back into the exhibition here. And so this is both the first room and the last room that visitors experience. It's both the entrance and the exit. And Tia, could you describe why an installation, and maybe talk about unpacking both the film and the wayfinders in this work called Wayfinder?
There is a lot of sensitivity and complexity as a white woman researching lineage and connection to an Indigenous group. And that has always been present with me. I wanted this first installation to speak to the body, to my physicality in the work itself, but also tying the work to this trip, to these places, to standing on the land where my ancestors are from. And yet at the same time, I know enough that I don't know enough to really depict tradition or culture. So it was really important to me that nothing in this exhibition is traditional expression of Sami culture, or even Finnish culture for that matter. This dress is an art dress This is not a gakti. Gakti is the traditional dress of the Sami people, and it reflects where you come from. There are aspects of a traditional gakti that tells you who your family is, tells other people who your family is, tells your marital status, tells things, really personal things about you. And so this is not a gakti. This dress is about that circle on the hem. There's 16 circles, and it's that generation that Wilhelmina is from. And so the wayfind is, it's an honor. It's honoring the journey, the physical journey that I took. The orange pieces are actual road markers from Norway. It's what lines the roads up north, because there aren't really any shoulders. You don't want to go off the road. And so there are 16 wayfinding markers formed in a circle, because the circle is my guide for this work. And so in the film, I went premeditated with this vision of walking in circles on the earth where my people come from. And so the installation is in large part about that. But then there's also sound. And so the melody that you hear is a melody that came to me when I was in Keobounpheng on this journey. And it's my voice. I recorded 2 different tracks separate from each other, and just kind of mashed them together. So it's not a true harmony or disharmony, but that's kind of what it feels like, is I'm just pulling a bunch of things together and finding meaning through them. And so what's, I think, is really beautiful, and I don't know if I fully grasped it, like in my mind as I was envisioning, I want this installation here and I want this sound component. But what happens is that it's like you can hear it from outside the gallery. You can hear it when you're in the room with the work, and it awakens the body. I think more than I could have ever imagined. I think when you, as a person, when you step into the room, your body just settles. And then it puts you into a place where when you enter the gallery and you start looking at these pieces, your body is awake. And I really believe that as human beings, our bodies know things that we can't comprehend with our mind, or that we have been taught to forget that we know. And so I love the idea of people coming into that room already settled, and then meeting the work. And I think I have witnessed people's bodies reacting to the work, and then their minds trying to catch up. And I think that we attach to, like, how did you do that? How many holes? All of those things, because it's like our body is feeling, I mean, there's like vibrations, there's all this stuff, but I'm not sure how I get it. But, you know, our body is there, and my body is there. My body is in this work. And I think, and I hope that when people go in there, their bodies react first.
Yeah, Michael Fried, a 1960s, 50s art critic, student of Greenberg's, bemoaned that notion. He called it theatricality, that you go to the theater to watch performance, you don't need to perform in an art gallery. But I think your work strikes on this core central tenet that was really shoved aside during the 20th century, shoved aside during this notion of progress, shoved aside by white supremacy, you could even say. That is, the brain is an organ, and it is as integral to your body as every other component. And so that kind of brings us into the exhibition, into the physicality of the work and the scope and the scale. Just looking at this, Tia, could you talk a little bit about the different series that are in the exhibition? So we've talked about Who Do You Think You Are, Foundations, or we have not talked about Foundations or Who Do You Think You Are. Could you talk about some of the other bodies of work that we see in front of us here?
Sure. I mean, right, these 4 small pieces, I think now that you've seen that genealogy map, you might understand those a little bit more. There are obviously multiple layers of understanding, but that really celebrates the circle round, like coming together and honoring the role of the circle. Let's see, the square piece there is who do you think you are, number 2. So as a series, who do you think you are has these black and white capsules that I think of as portraits. Sometimes they're self-portraits, sometimes they're portraits of me with people in my life. And so there are more who do you think you are than I had anticipated in this show. I realized through the journey and through the making of the work that was really what I was seeking, was to understand myself and how the people in my life have helped to form who I am, both living and then, ancestrally. Foundation is a tribute to the underlayer, the colored pencil layer. I think that some people might read it as showing process, but if you remember me telling you my process, I drill holes before I color. And so there are no holes in any of those pieces. And so that means that I intended for them to just be colored pencil on wood. I intended them to celebrate. Let me come back at it this way. The Threads series is really about holding complexity. Multiple layers of thread with a different pattern in the colored pencil. And it's about expanding my worldview and understanding that I belong to this vast system of geometry. If geo is earth, then that's the natural order, and we all belong, we all come from it, we all belong to it just as we are. And the diversity that can come from starting with the same foundation, I think, and I hope I think it's so amazing and inspiring and hopeful that we can exist without having to force ourselves into the expectations of others. And so, coming back to the foundation series, like inevitably, as I'm working on the most complex pieces, there are parts of the journey and parts of the process where I'm like, oh, I just love the way this is looking. And I know from my daily practice that it's okay to love that, and it's okay to ruin it. It's okay to ruin it and to keep going. And so I am constantly learning. And so I needed to be able to let myself love that underlayer too. That's part of allowing everything. That's part of allowing everything to exist. And so the foundation series is really honoring that love that I have of each aspect, because it pulls, my method pulls from skills that I have acquired over the course of my life.
Yeah. And so I think it's interesting too, when we were talking about, one thing we haven't talked about is scale. And so you mentioned these 4 smaller works in relationship to the genealogy chart, but it's interesting too, it's also about seasonality, and a seasonal way of thinking, an evolution of time. Do you have any, now that you have some distance with time, how has your thought process changed about these smaller works, especially given that a variation of it is the cover for a little small local band recent release?
Yes, it's going to be the cover of the Semisonic album that's being released in November. I think that each series serves a role for me, serves as a place within me. I guess if I have to think about it, you called it the radial threading pattern, which I really like, but the radial threading pattern seems really simple, especially at this scale, but there are 2 pieces that are larger than these 4 in the show. And I don't know if we have pictures of those on here, but they get complicated really fast in a way that I wasn't really able to explore enough for this show. there's potential there, but what I, like, I know I can now think, I can think through the language of the vertical threads. I can like envision these complex things, the patterns and the way I might explore the next piece, etc. But with the radial stitching, it's a whole new world. And then I think in a way that's really indicative of this linearity versus circularity, in a worldview sort of way, I think.
So that kind of brings us back to this piece that we've talked a little bit about prior, with the orange central circle being you. This is a linear stitch pattern, but it's incredibly complex. Could you tell us a little bit more about this? Who do you think you are? I believe it's Who Do You Think You Are, number 8.
This is threads number 9.
Okay,
I don't expect you to. It's only because I
meant to put the
it's
title.
really hard to know. I purposely do it. I purposely number it because they're exploring a certain theme, but it also makes it difficult to like get to know them and remember their names. But this is threads number 9, and it is complicated. This is actually a 2-channel threading pattern. So there's a colored layer and a black and white layer, but I think it's the intricacy of the patterning that really makes it feel complicated, where it's not as complicated as the threads number 10 that is about the Northern Lights, where you kind of like really have to stand in different places to see it. Oh yeah, we could go back to that one. I'll show you. Like this one right here has a 3-channel pattern, and the others are all 2-channel patterns. And that just means that I'm just layering more pieces, so there's more space in between the different patterns, and your body and your eyes have to work a little bit harder to see everything that's going on. I think the underlayer, if we go back to that bigger one, the colored pencil layer of this one plays a really big role. This one's a little bit different than others because even though it starts with the same even circles, I have played around with it so that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, there's 7 big circles on the bottom instead of like 13, for example, in others. So I think at different times you see the threads, whether it's the black and white or the color, you see the background layer, and I don't know what else to say about that. It's just you just like go back and forth around it, through it.
Spoken like a true weaver. Or Midwesterner, however you want to unpack that.
Yeah.
So here we see those capsule forms again, but it brings me back to this kind of notion that is repeated throughout the gallery, and that is the opacity that's presented by the seriality and the titling. And you touched upon this a little bit, that it gives you a framework, but is there also distance in that you appreciate? Do you appreciate the distance of the opaque? Well, great question. Because these works seem so physically personal, right? You're handling them, you're threading them. I mean, towards the end, you did bring in a studio assistant and an assistant to help knot and thread. But they're deeply emotional and personal stories. Does the titling give you a distance to then send these works out for sale, to the storage unit after the exhibition, to other people's walls to live with?
Yes. But it's not just the titles. It's not just the titles. I think that what's amazing to me about this body of work is that, like I've shared some of the earlier sculptures, and like Bloodline is about the bloodlines, and Full Circle is about the circle, and whatever. And I feel like all of that, everything is included in this body of work. All of my ideas, all of my issues, all of my hopes, all of my fears, everything is in here, all of my stories. And so, sorry, I'm getting a little emotional because I do hide things. I hide things in here that are me. Like, these are me. These are two self-portraits, different ways that we see each other, and they change over time. I mean, like, I really like to think I'm the one on the right now, where I'm just wide open and everything's coming in and out and processing and kind of infinitely moving, and yet clearly I'm still affected by the meticulous structure of it. And there are absolutely stories. There are, one of them is me and my parents, and learning to see, that one on the left is me and my parents. Learning to see myself as one of the lines on a genealogy chart, and understanding how much is lost when we just have a name and a birth and a death place, that whole lives exist within that line. I am a very alive person right now. My parents are alive people. My children are alive people. And I am the through. I am what has impacted who my kids are.
I think, history, a friend who is an actual historian. I am very reluctantly a historian. I'm a contemporary art historian, and only because that's what my degree says from the University of Florida. At which point I'm now legally obligated to say go Gators. But sorry, Gopher fans. But the reality here, though, is that the labor, the poetic, the thing I appreciate the best and the most about your work and your practice, and having gotten to know you these last few years, is the way you reinsert the hand into history. My friend that I was alluding to just before infamously once wrote that history is the removal and the flattening for us to tell greater, grander stories than ourselves. It is the deadening of humanity in order for us to conceptually wrap our brains around the vastness of time. And that one must exist with the other, right? As my therapist very frequently tells me, life and being an adult is holding two truths at once, two oppositional truths at once. And I think your work does that so poetically, so beautifully, and the reason why I'm touching upon this opaqueness is because it allows, once we have that kind of conceptual grit to hang on to, it allows us to see ourselves reflected back. And here at one point you had talked about the black and white being the binary and this kind of resistance to the binary. But when we were walking through the galleries just a couple of weeks ago, you were embracing the binary in a way that was profound and changing. But as the curator, I was like, well, no, duh. I mean, you've melted the binary in so many of these works and embraced it. Not to be a jerk right now, Tia, but can you talk a little bit about this fracturing that is happening in these what I know are later bodies of work that kind of came out? I think you saw it in this kind of work on the left. You see it, this fracturing of color, the fracturing of the binary. Was that something that was easy for you to incorporate, whether that's a literal easiness or conceptual struggle?
Well, the black and white layer, I tried to make a piece without the black and white layer. I tried to do it where it was like two colors and two colors, and I could never get it to settle.
What do you mean by subtle?
I mean, there's a lot of premeditation in my process of making these pieces, right? I'm like mapping them out. I map out the different layers. I map out the drilling patterns, all of those things. And I see them individually. And once I get to, I mean, I can get as far as having all of the black and white pattern. I mean, the black and white layer is pretty finite. You put it on there and then it's done. But when I get to the colorful layer, it's like, I often pull the thread out over and over again. I put it in, it's like, nope, that's not right. Pull it out. Try something else, put it in, put it out. And so for me to have tried to do it without the black and white, I couldn't get it to a place where it felt, and it's not feeling right. It's just feeling, I guess, maybe alive, or maybe like enough.
Do you think it's support?
I think that no matter how hard we work to decolonize, and no matter how hard I work to expand, become an expansive thinker, we live in a binary society, and you have to be able to expand your thinking within this black and white world. At least right now we do. Like, we have to go into these systems and bring the expansive thinking to that system. And I guess is maybe how I think about it. That's the lesson I learned, is that I actually need those black and white layers in there. But this piece, this vertical piece right here, one, it's a different circular pattern that I'm using. It's different than all of the others. It has that petal pattern.
I think we have a close up of it here.
The black and white layer of this one is actually a black, gray, and white layer. So I have eased that binary, and it feels you can physically feel the difference of that. The two become more integrated to each other. And I think, there's a lot of different entry points to understanding and speaking about the work, which I think is also an attribute of embracing complexity. But if you think about this as easing a colonial mindset, first we have to be able to hold them both together,
Yeah, I guess for me, it's less about an ease of the mindset. I think you're breaking through the line in this work and some of the later works in a way that we're not talking about with what I think most people assume with abstraction and pattern, right? The technical term is horror vacui, the fear of space. And your work sits in space. It embraces and uses the space as a framing. The negative of the planar wood is literally another support system and design element for the work itself. And so I think my question was more maybe as more technical than anything, and that is, do you see the work expanding beyond the design framework? Dare I ask the designer?
Well, I mean, I just have to say, I didn't go to art school, so sometimes I don't know I don't know about what abstract art is supposed to be.
There's not supposed to be. There is not. That is a great.
But
great
so I think I don't know. Is it going to go beyond this thing? I mean, the fact of the matter is that like this isn't right now. These threads are fully dependent on the structure of the wood. Like if you look at it in terms of like fiber art, this isn't anything. It is not a traditional fiber technique. It is not weaving. It's not sewing. It's not embroidery. It's just kind of like thread on wood. It's a thing. And so the thread is fully dependent on the panel. If the panel wasn't there, I mean, it requires that structure at this point, So from a very practical standpoint, I don't know how I would do that.
That's a legit answer. And I think it brings us to this back piece too, which I think gets us back to this question of support and bracing. And seeing the visual work. I just kind of want to, as we're getting close to time, kind of bring it back to this notion of labor. How many hours did this work take you?
Oh, I don't set a timer.
No, I'm not expecting one. You could give seconds and minutes. That would be helpful.
I mean, some of the other big ones. I mean, I've tried to calculate it. It's hundreds of hours, like 300, 400, 500, 600 hours, depending on the complexity of the pieces. I mean, to give you but see, that's like the tricky thing about labor, and the tricky thing about work, and the tricky thing about trying to quantify an art practice is that, like, does that include what I was thinking about in the shower? Does that include me problem solving patterns that aren't working? Does that include, like, there's so much that goes in, and I realize that I mean, I am so privileged right now to be able to work this way. This past year, like, my husband worked his butt off to make it possible for me to literally set boundaries and not do anything social for nearly a year to make this work happen. The amount of focus that an artist needs to do something like this, to create a body of work like this, is immense. And it's not just about the minutes. It's about how we carve out focused time. And it's not even about just the act of making. It is about the emotional labor of processing really old things.
Do you think, yeah. And so I think that brings us back to this first question, this first notion that pushed you back into artistry. Do you feel like you've found what you were looking for after your break?
I
You
don't
have
think-
to answer that.
Yes,
but-
I mean, that was a sigh of like amazement, because my sister-in-law recently asked me, she's like, well, do you know what you want to do? And I'm like, for the first time in my life, I am doing exactly what I want to do. And what's so amazing about it is that I feel supported. I feel like, and not just supported by the people in my life, but it's like opportunities like this show up. Getting grants to support travel, to go back and to deepen this connection. It's like artists who are able to create that type of vulnerability in their own practice can reflect meaning back to clearly large groups of people. And I think that's so powerful. And I am blown away by the response. And I am, I take this responsibility seriously. Like, this is a privilege and a responsibility to do this work in a really authentic and true way, so that I am benefiting from it, obviously, because it's transforming who I am as a human being. But I think anytime we see someone who goes through something really meaningful, we see ourselves in them too. So I try to just be as authentic as I can, and to be as honest as possible. And I know that someone has talked about, one of the reviewers said something like, the revealing threads don't reveal a whole lot because it's revealing something to me. But I really feel like the threads are revealing themselves to me. The threads are revealing the lessons to me. It's the work. And I am just here and trying to allow the response to sink in. Like, I think one of the most profound feelings I had leading up to the opening of the exhibition is the uncomfortability and the discomfort I felt with the potential of being accepted for who I wanted to present to the world, like, as myself. And what does that say about the systems we live in if it's uncomfortable to be accepted?
Well, I think that's a beautiful place to stop. Not only because we're 10 minutes over, but I want to thank everybody for being here tonight. And please, let's show our support and thanks here.